Right, so we are ready to render this scene, and mine's not completed. You would want to create a nice composition and move your camera here, of course, to looking at the table from this angle, from a low angle, and you want to arrange your donuts and things like that. And you can find online this tutorial for some good compositions. You don't need to copy it, just ways to be able to make it look really nice. So it's time to finish this off. And in order to render, the first thing that I would say is to go and select your camera. So if you hit 0 and then you go and you click on the edge of your camera to select it, or if you go over here into the outliner, you find your camera and select that there. You can select the camera that way. And then you go down here to a place where we're always going to use this from now on. It's called depth of field. Okay, so depth of field means that we're going to focus on one object and other things become just a little bit blurry as we go. So I'm going to check depth of field, and I'm going to go and open that up. All right. Now I need to be able to see where the limits are on this camera. So the other thing that I will need to do is with the viewport display down here within the camera menu, I should have mentioned that. I'm in the camera menu. Once I select the camera, I'm down here in this green movie camera menu. Okay, and in the viewport display, I would go and I would click limits. Now limits is going to allow me to figure out where I want the focal point for this to be. Okay, and so I'm seeing this, and the other thing is that's very important to understand is this is how far your camera is seeing. So my camera is seeing from here to way back here, behind there. That's fine. It's just that if you make that limit really, really long, what's going to happen is your computer will use a lot of memory and all of that to be able to go and render all of that area. So sometimes when you're in a big scene, sometimes you can't, it just kind of cuts off. Like if you're doing a landscape or something, it just cuts off and you can't see it. And the way that you fix that is up here under the limits of the camera. So I'm sorry, it's probably the clip end, excuse me. If I go to click clip end and I go and I back that off, you can see that it moves. I can make it see farther, make it see shorter, but I only need it to see about this far. So that's good. But where it's focusing now is what I'm paying attention to. So I want the donut on the plate to be my focus, and then the other things around it are going to be a little bit out of focus. Okay, so that's this axis right here. That's what this is right here. So if I go over to the depth of field again, if I go into here, and I could just focus on an object, but the focal distance is controlled right here with focus distance. So if I go and I drag this, I can move it to a spot where I want it to focus on. Okay, but I think I'm actually going to go and focus on object. So I'm going to click on the eyedropper, and then I'll come over here and click on the icing here. So now it's going to focus right there on that icing, and let me show you what that does. Now if I go here and I go back into my camera view, I touch 0. Now this is called an f-stop, okay? And an f-stop, it's the same as a real camera. If I go and I lower that down, everything becomes very, very blurry, as you can see, okay? But as I bring this up, I can go and I can, ooh, is that a keyframe feature? Oh, animate, neat, neat. All right, I can go and I can bring it more into focus, okay? Now, so generally, I want things to just be a little bit out of focus. So I'm going to start looking really closely at the bowl because I want this to be in focus, the icing on the donut, but the bowl I want it to be a little bit out of focus. And so I'm going to go and start way down here at about, let's start at 0.2, which is an unrealistic f-stop. That doesn't actually exist in the world with real lenses. So I'm just going to zoom in here so I can really see what's going on. I know that my donut is going to be in focus no matter what, okay? But I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to take a look at how this looks. I want this to be just a little bit blurry. So I'm going to click this up until I can see that be, I'm liking like 0.9. 0.9. That will also, by the way, put the wall a little bit out of focus, and that's good. So I like 0.9. That is a good place for me. So I'm going to click Save on that. Now, the next thing we're going to need to do is go and set up our rendering. In Eevee, we have a render here, a render settings. I'm going to go to the camera that looks like this now, the render window. And what I'm seeing in the viewport is 16 samples. So if I go and I bump that up to 64, this is what it will actually look like when I render it, because my render is set to 64 samples. All right. I know it's hard to see the difference between that, but basically to save on memory, you usually keep your viewport kind of low and you keep your render at about 64. So that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing that 64 is a good, that is online when I was looking at proper render settings for Eevee. 64 samples is good with the Eevee render engine, okay? And the viewport, I'm looking at 16 samples right now. And that's fine. All right, I already have ambient occlusion checked here. I think we did that earlier. But what I can do is now I can kind of finish that off by deciding what I want that to look like as far as the distance goes. So ambient occlusion is going to be just kind of shadows, these shadows right in here. Okay, it's kind of the shadow, the ambient light, and it's really interesting. But I'm going to go and I'm going to just turn that way up so you can see what it does. All right, so I'm at 1. I'm sorry, distance of, that's 2.66 meters. All right, so I wouldn't want things to be super dark, but I also don't want them to be totally washed out. So that is up to you. That distance there on ambient occlusion, you can tweak that to anywhere that you want. You don't want it to look super, super dark, all right? But it's something to think about. I do want some contrast in the image, and it was like really washed out and very light. So I'm going to bring in some shadows there. So it looks like I got some decent shadows. I'm wondering if that's going to get really noisy looking. 1 second. So that's looking really noisy. See that? Let me bump up the viewport to see if it's going to come out. If I go and bump up that 64. I still see a lot of noise in there. Those dots, see those? That's too much. So I'm going to pull down my distance to happy medium, about a 1.8 or something like that. I also noticed that my donut is coming through my plate, so you might want to check for stuff like that. I could go move that up a little later on, but you just want to check for stuff like that. Like, uh-oh, look at that. It's coming through the plate. All right, so I got that. I'm going to go down here and I'm going to choose now my bloom. We've already enabled that, and I'm going to go back into the camera view. So with bloom, oh man, my AO is still too high. That's too much there. So let me just come back and just bring that down a little bit more. I'll try that for a little while, see if I like that. All right, with the bloom, you can mess with the threshold and the intensity. So if I turn up the threshold, we should be able to see that the light is looking a little bit more kind of hazy or so. Like if I turn it all the way off, this is what it looks like. And if I go and pull that up a little bit more, I see a little bit more contrast in the scene that way. So I'm just looking at it and adjusting that threshold. You can also adjust the intensity if you want of the bloom. So that's totally up to you how you make it look, the intensity and the threshold of the bloom. All right, so that's good. And now I'm going to go, and one more thing, down here under color management, this is something I learned from CG Boost. If I go down here to color management, this is pretty interesting. and I go and I choose the under look right here. It's on none. Okay, the look none. I'm going to choose that to is it medium contrast or is it 1 second? Yeah, medium high contrast right there, and I can see a little bit more contrast in the scene that way. All right. You can adjust your exposure if you want. Exposure is how light or dark. If your scene's looking really, really light or really, really dark, you can tweak it right here. And I'm just going to go and actually bring down my exposure just a little bit. I think I like that a little bit more. And it brings out my shadows and get a little bit more contrast in the scene that way. Okay. Okay. Wonderful. So I'm going to save there. And last thing is to deal with these sprinkles. Notice I have no sprinkles on my donut. So I'm going to have to go and fix this. So this is what I learned in CG Boost. They're doing the same thing. So here's my sprinkles, right? And this is kind of hard to explain. But when I go and I am in the rendered view here, I see no sprinkles. Why is that? They're on right now. Do I need to do this? No. Let me just turn all these guys on. You're probably wondering, what are those things? Where are they? Do this for me. Go to this sort, the little funnel up here. Okay, click on that and enable all of these restriction toggles. Go ahead and turn them all on so that they're all blue. And that way you'll see the same thing that I'm seeing. Okay. All right. So as soon as I go and everything, light them all up. Make them all white. Everything. Make them all white so we all start on the same part here. So the first one is, can you select it? All right, if you turn that off, you won't be able to select the object. Second one is the eyeball. Can you see it? This is hide. Okay, you either see it in the viewport or you don't. I unclick that and my white sprinkle goes away. Okay, but it will also go away off of your donut, I do believe. Then the third one is a new thing. Disable in the viewport. So I can disable it in the viewport, but when I go to render this, it'll still be there. If I go to render and render image, it's going to take a minute. But it will still be there, and I'm wondering if it's going to open up a new window. It's not. But let's just prove that. It'll take a couple seconds to do. That white sprinkle should be there when the render pulls up. Okay, it showed up in another window behind here. So click on that. There it is. There's the white sprinkle. It's still there, even though I disabled it in the viewport. Okay. As you can see. So that's not going to do it for us. So turn that back on. Turn the little computer screen back on. So then maybe I would go and I would turn off the render for itself. This is whether the object is going to render or not. So if I do that, it's going to be hard to see, but my white sprinkles are going to go away when I click render. So it's not going to render the big white sprinkle in the middle, but it's also not going to render the sprinkle that's on the donut. Pretty sure that's the way it's going to work. This is new in Eevee, so it's a little weird because everything was in layers. Okay, there we go. And do I have a white sprinkle on there? Yeah, I don't see one. I think there's a little reflection, a little noise there, but I don't see one, so I'm going to get out of there. Okay, so that's not our answer. So what we have to actually do is this. We have to make a sub-collection. So in this here, I believe we're just with the group selected that you're using for your sprinkles. You come up here and you select this. Let me move this over so you can see it. This little guy, little new collection button. And it should put a sub-collection inside of this collection. Okay, so we'll call this the parent collection. We'll call this the sub collection. Okay, because there's the parent and then the sub is inside there. Okay, all right. So what we want to do is we want to go and we want to move all of these into the sub collection, which is going to screw up our particle system. But that's okay. We can go back and fix it in just a couple minutes. All right, so that is in there. That's in the sub collection there. All right. Now, what we have to do is We have to have our sub-selection as visible as far as the rendering goes, but we want our collection to be not visible. So the parent collection, the top one, should be not visible to the render. I'm also going to disable it in the viewport just so I don't have to look at it. But then this is, I'm hoping this does it. No, okay, I'm going to leave it like that. I'm a little confused because this is new to me too. Yep, I'm going to leave this collection here. I'm going to leave this as renderable. All right? And then I'm going to have to go and select each one of my donuts. The icing, that is. I'm going to have to go over into the particle system. And not just one, I'm going to have to do all of them. Okay? And then I'm going to go over here, and it's going to be instance collection. It's no longer going to be sprinkles. For me, it's called, the sub-collection is called sprinkles 1. So I'm going to go and choose sprinkles 1, and it'll be on there. Okay, so I'm going to hit render, and I'm really crossing my fingers that this is going to work. Now there's one other thing that we should do before we render. Under display mode, instead of having a new window and having that show up in the background, I'm going to go to image editor and do that. Okay, I'm going to save all of this before I go and render, and I'm going to render image. And now it's going to do this. It's going to render inside of Blender instead of a separate window. And I'm really crossing my fingers I don't see big sprinkles, but I do see them on the donut because I watched on CG Boost and he was doing the same exact thing. I think I took proper notes. So let's see if this works. I'm really hoping it does. Voila. Now, as far as, I have one more test now because I'm a little confused. I'm going to hit escape and I'm just a little confused about this. So these, I would think that I could disable them in the viewport. So if I disable those in the viewport, now I don't see them on here. If I go and I click render, render image, again, I just tried doing this here. You can kind of see by the icons what I did. Let's see what happens. I'm curious. Because otherwise, I guess you just do this at the end and leave them in there? I'm not sure. Aha! That is the way to do it. So if you want to be able, just to reiterate, this is what it looks like right here. Okay? The parent collection and the sub collection. Okay? Don't forget, you have to go into each icing, and you're going to have to select it and go into the particle system and reassign the new collection. Okay? But if I go and I click escape, I won't see those on here. Right? They're not here. That's because I turned them off here. If I turn them on in the viewport, then the sprinkles are going to be in the wet. Now, some of our other brilliant students also mentioned yesterday that I could probably just take these if I wanted to, and I could go and zoom out and hit G and Z and get them out of there. Okay, so I could go back to here, and maybe that's your solution too. Okay, so I'm going to do one last render now. I should have saved that last image as a review. Okay, there's my scene. I really don't like this white light, by the way. I would take that out and I would finish up the composition and all of that. So, last thing is, it's just the same as old Blender. You come over here and you go to Blender 279, I should say. Once this is rendered, you go to Image, and then you go to, used to be Save as Image, now it's Save. It's going to give me this. I'm going to need to give it a name. Okay, I'm going to choose where it's going to save. It is going to be a PNG. If you wanted to do Photoshop processing and things like that and go and do color adjustments and all of that in Photoshop, if you're into that, choose 16-bit color depth. Otherwise, 8 is okay. All right, and I'm going to save that as image. So I've got that as its own image now. If I go to my desktop and I choose my desktop here, I should see donuts. There it is. Okay, so I got a nice image. The resolution is nice. Looking pretty good. That's the thing I didn't go over in the render screen, but we've already learned that. Very last thing that I want to mention is in the render window, you don't have the same controls anymore. You have to go to this little printer icon right here, right underneath the, that's new. So I rendered at 1920 by 1080 pixels. You could also choose from a lot of different, if you want a 4K image, for instance, there it would be. Okay, I would choose this UHD TV one, but generally we usually use this 720p or 1080p here. Okay, this is this is called 1080. Okay, and I've got all of that, and it's telling it where to go, and this is where all of that information is. And that is all.